students. In my last class, I defined partnership as a type of business organization in which a minimum of 2 persons and a maximum of 20 persons legally agree to set up a business outfit with the sole aim of making profits. Also, I discussed the features of a partnership business, the advantages and disadvantages of a partnership business. I concluded my lesson by looking at the various sources of funds available to a partnership business. So in today's lesson, we are going to be discussing the limited liability companies. Now, a company may be defined as a legal person or entity created by the association of a number of people in accordance with the law. For a private limited liability company, the minimum number to set up this type of company is 2, while the maximum number is 50. While for public limited liability company, the minimum number is 7, while it has no maximum number. Also in today's lesson, I will discuss the features of both the private limited liability companies and the public limited liability companies. I will also look at the advantages and disadvantages of these companies. So, I will conclude the lesson by differentiating between a public limited liability company from a private limited liability company. A company defined as a legal person or entity created by the association of individuals who agreed and jointly pool their capital or resources together in accordance with the law in order to establish and own a business venture that is distinct from their owners. At the course of today's lesson, we're going to focus on these 2 types of companies. 1, the private limited liability companies, and 2, the public limited liability companies. The private limited liability company is defined as one which by its articles restricts the right to transfer its shares, limits the number of its shareholders from 2 to 50, prohibits any invitation to the public to subscribe for its shares, and the name of the private company must end with limited or LTD. Examples of private limited liability company in Nigeria is Bluebird Nigeria Limited, while the public limited liability company is defined as one which by its articles allow the public to subscribe to its shares, must have a minimum of 7 persons, but no maximum number is prescribed. It allows the shares to be transferred, and the name of the public company must end with PLC. Examples of public limited liability company in Nigeria include the Zenith Bank Nigeria PLC, Guinness Nigeria PLC, just to mention but few. At this juncture, you are going to answer the following questions. 1. What is a company? 2. You will define the private limited liability company, that is LTD, and the public limited liability company, PLC. Moving forward, I will explain the features of a private limited liability company and a public limited liability company, which is also known as a joint stock company. First, ownership. The private limited liability company is owned by a minimum of 2 shareholders and a maximum of 50, while a public limited company is owned by a minimum of 7 shareholders with no maximum number. Secondly, liability. Both the private and the public limited liability companies have limited liabilities, meaning in the event of liquidation, the shareholders will only lose the amount they have invested in the business, as their personal properties are protected by law. Next is management. Both the private limited liability company and the public limited liability company are owned by the shareholders and managed by board of directors appointed by the shareholders. Next off is the legal entity. Both the private limited liability company and the public limited liability company are registered. So both business has separate legal entity and are different from the owners of the business.
To highlight the differences between a private limited company and a public limited company, beginning with the meaning, as a definition. For private limited company, a company whose ownership lies in the hands of private individual is called a private limited company. While for public limited company, a company whose ownership lies in the hands of the general public is known as a public limited company. Secondly, the minimum number of shareholders for private limited company is 2, and the maximum number is 200. Although in countries like ours, Nigeria for example, the maximum number is 50. But for public limited company, the minimum number of shareholders is 7, while it has no maximum number. Third is directors. For private limited company, there must be at least 2 directors, while the law permits just at least 3 directors for public limited company. We go to share transfer. For private limited company, it is restricted because no shareholder can transfer its shares without the consent of other members of the company. While for public limited company, shares are easily transferable. Then we have invitation to the public for subscription. It is prohibited in private limited company, but in public limited company, it is permitted. So moving forward, we have the prospectus. The issuance of prospectus or statement in lieu of prospectus is not required in the private limited company, while in the public limited company, the issuance of prospectus or statement in lieu of prospectus is compulsory in public limited company. Then the statutory meeting in private limited company is voluntary, but it is very compulsory or mandatory in public limited company. Quorum. To form a quorum in a private limited company, at least 2 members of the company or shareholders must be present in person to complete the quorum at the AGM, as the annual general meeting, while 5 members or shareholders must be present in person to complete the quorum at the annual general meeting in public limited company. To commence business. Once the company gets certificate, that is a private limited company, once they get its certificate of incorporation, they can start their business. But for the public limited company, once the company gets a certificate of incorporation, they are still going to wait for certificate of trading to commence business. Certificate of trading gives them the power to borrow from the public. Then coming to the name, the suffix, the word private limited or limited or LTD abbreviation is added as a suffix after the name of the company. While for public limited company, the word limited or public limited company or PLC.
The final questions for today's lesson. 1. You are going to mention 6 features of limited liability companies. 2. State 5 differences between a private limited company and a public limited company. I began today's class by defining a company as an association of individuals who agreed and jointly pooled their capital together in order to establish and own a business venture which is distinct from their owners. I went further to look at the types of limited liability companies. I discussed the features of private limited liability companies and the public limited liability companies. I also went further to differentiate between a private limited liability company and a public limited liability company. Ensure you attempt all the quizzes and assignments in this module, and use the question box for all your questions and suggestions.